Women like to say men have it all because we can pee standing up and don't have to worry about menstruating during the presidential fitness test. But in my opinion, the best perk of them all is not having to incubate a human in my body for 9 months and then push it out of my pee hole. I know that's not exactly how it works, but this isn't a science channel. It's a mythology channel, and it just so happens that there are some seriously messed up myths about women enduring unimaginable pains during childbirth. The most notable have gotta be the births of the Olympians, because they're the Olympians. So today, I'm gonna tell you all about their traumatic births as well as the unique way that each one ascended to the throne of their domain. Fortunately, we can knock out 7 of those births with just one story, the one detailing how Zeus and his siblings took control of the cosmos. Longtime viewers have no doubt heard this one a few times, but chances are you either missed or completely forgot about the alternate timeline where Zeus is not the only one to escape his father's attempted infanticide. The classic story goes that after Poseidon's father Cronus castrated his father Uranus and tossed his balls into the ocean, Gaia, Mother Earth, told Cronus about a prophecy that one of his children would hijack his shiny new throne from him. This freaked Cronus out considerably, so he tried to thwart this prophecy the only way he knew how, by literally swallowing any children that his wife Rhea gave birth to. This was an alright plan at first, but when kid number 6 came around, Rhea had grown tired of giving up her babies to this monster, so she swapped out the infant Zeus with a rock, which Cronus promptly swallowed. Meanwhile, she entrusted Zeus with some nymphs who secretly raised him to adulthood without Cronus knowing. At least that's the mainstream version of events written by the Greek poet Hesiod in his work The Theogony. But did you know there's another version where Rhea saves Poseidon from being swallowed as well? I had never heard this one before, but apparently Pausanias, a geographer from ancient Greece, wrote about this variant in his work, Descriptions of Greece. He says that in the city of Arcadia, they believe that instead of Rhea feeding Poseidon directly to Cronus, she hid him among a flock of sheep and he was raised there among the lambs. But here's my favorite part. Instead of her craftily giving Cronus a baby-sized rock to swallow like she later would when Zeus was born, with Poseidon, she lied and said she gave birth to a horse, then offered up a little foal for Cronus to swallow. On the one hand, I feel horrible for that little pony, but on the other, I find it kind of hilarious that she made Cronus swallow something with hooves. You gotta wonder what was going through Cronus's mind at that point. I would think that his wife birthing a horse after he sired 4 children without issue would raise a red flag or two, but I guess his arrogance got the better of his judgment. We'll give him a pass though, because he was the first guy to go through something like that. He's not like us where he had the wisdom of his ancestors to rely on or reruns of Maury to watch when he was homesick from school. Anyway, whichever of Poseidon's births you prefer, the rest of his ascension story matches up exactly with what you've heard in the past. Sometime later, when Zeus had grown to his full strength, he infiltrated his father's retinue of servants and served him a chalice that was laced with a puking potion. Cronus drank the whole thing without hesitation and proceeded to vomit up the 4 or 5 children he swallowed in reverse order. No word on what happened to the horse though. I'm assuming because he wasn't immortal, he came out the other end. After the second birth of Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and Hades, they joined forces with Poseidon and Zeus to bring an end to the reign of the Titans. But make no mistake, even with their powers combined, this was no easy feat. In fact, Zeus had to recruit his uncles, Cronus' brothers, the Cyclopes, to lend their blacksmithing skills to the war effort, which is how he, Hades, and Poseidon ended up with their iconic weapons, the Thunderbolt, the Invisibility Helm, and of course, the Trident, meant to represent the 3-pronged fisherman's spear. For the next 10 years, the reborn Olympians and Titans waged war for control of the cosmos. Everyone involved shed blood, sweat, tears, and ambrosia, but in the end, the Olympians came out on top. And to punish the Titans for their wicked ways, they were cast down into Tartarus. Meanwhile, Zeus and his brothers drew lots to decide their respective domains. Zeus wound up with the sky, Hades with the underworld, and Poseidon became god of the sea. Now, contrary to what many of us have have been taught, we have no reason to believe that any of the brothers were unhappy with their allotted domains. The death-fearing fat cats in Hollywood love to portray the chthonic king as indefinitely dissatisfied, always vying for Zeus's position and the power that comes with it. But in actual myth, Hades was far too busy managing his own domain and his retinue of assistants to have any time to orchestrate some kind of underworld uprising. The story goes that after the war, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divvy up the domains of the sky, sea, and underworld. But curiously, we're never told how or why the goddesses took up their domains. It just sort of happens. And while the stories about Hera make you wonder why she would preside over marriage, women, and family, because her marriage is in shambles and on at least one occasion she inflicts absolute misery onto a vulnerable pregnant woman, Demeter's domain is very fitting. For starters, she just looks like a harvest goddess. Similar to Sif from Norse mythology, Demeter is described with long golden hair that resembles fields of grain, and there's ancient art depicting her with wheat or even corn in her hair. Going beyond her appearance, Homer's hymn to Demeter describes her as the revered goddess, lady of the golden sword and glorious fruits, while in the Orphic hymns she's described as the universal mother, source of wealth, goddess of seed, fruit, harvest, and threshing, our lovely, delightful queen. But don't get it twisted, Demeter did more than just conjure up fruits and veggies for people who were hungry. She actually shared her wisdom with humankind. By giving us the power to farm for these precious resources ourselves, she earned her place as one of the most respected and sacred gods in the entire pantheon. But while we're left to infer the specifics of how Demeter and Hera took up their respective roles, we are lucky enough to get a thorough explanation of Hestia's rise to power. Ironically though, it's found in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite. Apparently, it took some time for Hestia to find her proper place on Olympus, because the hymn states that she was relentlessly pursued by her brother Poseidon and nephew Apollo, the latter of whom wouldn't be born until several centuries after the Titanomachy. Hestia had told them she wasn't interested numerous times, but you know how persistent gods can be, so she resorted to swearing an oath on Zeus's head that she would stay a virgin for all of her days. It was a bold move, but Zeus respected it, probably because he couldn't imagine abstaining for more than a few seconds. So he rewarded Hestia for her commitment to chastity by declaring that her shrines would be the centerpiece of every home and temple, that all the gods would have to share a portion of their sacrifices with her, and that mortal men would call her the chief of the goddesses. The only other Olympian goddess alive at this point was Aphrodite. In a few less popular variants, she's described as the daughter of Zeus, but more often than not, she was born when Uranus's dismembered members landed in the ocean and mixed with the sea foam. When Aphrodite made her way to Olympus, the gods were basically blindsided by her beauty. Even Hera had to admit she was a smoke show, and Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades all wanted to make her their bride. The passion she stirred in their hearts, combined with her good looks and the grace that she carried herself with, made her domains of love, pleasure, and procreation a natural fit. So that does it for the original 6 Olympians and Hades, the lord of the underworld, but we've still got 7 more to go. First though, I want to say thanks to our sponsor, Squarespace. We're still in the first quarter of the new year, which means you've still got plenty of time to accomplish your New Year goals with Squarespace. You've been hearing me talk about Squarespace for over 5 years now, but it's never been easier to get started on developing your personal or professional website. For starters, they just implemented a new AI feature called Design Intelligence, which can literally build your website for you after you tell it what kind of site you want and a little about your brand identity. But while Design Intelligence lays a great foundation for your site, Squarespace's intuitive interface is what put them on the map decades ago. Their one-of-a-kind drag-and-drop technology lets you place assets wherever you want, and from there you can implement any other features you see fit. Build a portfolio for your art, make a playlist for your original music, and more. To try Squarespace out for free, just go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo. Then when you realize you love it, you can use code Jon Solo for 10% off your first purchase. So before Zeus married Hera, he had many other relationships, and one of those was with Metis, a Titaness who was regarded as wiser than all gods and men. Zeus was afraid that Metis would one day give birth to a powerful son that was capable of overthrowing him and taking his throne, similar to how he overthrew his own father Kronos and how Kronos overthrew Uranus. So he put a plan into action to prevent that from happening. Learning from his father's mistakes, Zeus didn't just swallow the powerful child after it was born and trap it in his stomach. Instead, he tricked Metis into letting him swallow her. I know, that sounds like a foolproof plan, but what he didn't realize is that Metis was already pregnant. Now we fast forward just a few wives later to just after Zeus and Hera say their I do's, and the king of the gods starts complaining about a terrible headache. The pain continues to get worse and worse until Zeus finds it unbearable, and in desperation he orders one of the other gods to hit him in the head with a Minoan axe. A migraine treatment I think we've all tried at least once. When the axe makes contact with Zeus's forehead, it splits open, and out leaps Athena, fully grown, fully armored with her iconic helmet and spear, and screaming a battle cry so powerful that she even terrified the earth and sky. Just when you thought mythology couldn't get any weirder. But don't worry, there's more to come. The young Athena went on to be raised by Triton, a low-level sea god whom Ariel's father was named after. Triton had a daughter of his own, Pallas, and he raised both girls in a militaristic style, so as you would expect, sometimes things got competitive between them. One day during sparring practice, things got a little carried away, and Pallas was about to strike Athena for real when Zeus intervened and distracted her, allowing Athena to deliver a killing blow. Now to be clear, this was not Athena's intention, and she felt horrible about killing her best friend, so to honor her, she attached her name to her own and called herself Pallas Athena. This was another epithet the warrior goddess commonly went by, and it means young woman, though it's believed this myth was actually invented by the Greeks as a way to explain that nickname after its meaning had been forgotten. Since we're back on the subject of names though, I want to take the time to explain whether Athens was named after Athena or vice versa, and how she became the patron goddess in the first place. Now according to myth, Athens used to go by a different name, Cecropia, and it was named after its leader, Cecrops, a half-man, half-snake who led the city into prosperity. Cecropia was revered by the gods for being the most beautiful city in Greece, and both Poseidon and Athena wanted dominion over it. Because the gods weren't very good at reaching compromises, and these two were no exception, Zeus declared that there'd be a contest to see who could provide a gift that would benefit the city more, and the winner would be its patron. For his gift, Poseidon stuck his trident into the ground and summoned a new body of salt water to be created, which gave the Athenians access to trade and travel. It was an excellent gift to be sure, but Athena did him one better. She planted the very first olive tree, which on the surface might not sound like a lot, but the Cecropians were smart and knew that tree would provide them with wood, oil, and fruit. Which, sidebar, I didn't even realize an olive was a fruit. Admittedly, I never really thought about it much, but it just never seemed like a fruit to me. I always considered it more of a decoration than anything else. Anyway, after Athena was declared the winner, she became the patron goddess of Cecropia. They officially changed their name to Athens, and the olive went on to become a symbol of economic prosperity. So even the olive got a happy ending. Now the story is a little misleading because in reality, experts believe that Athena actually got her name from the city and not the other way around. That's because in ancient Greece, the "-ine" sound is very rarely found in personal names in comparison to city names. But still, it's a good story, right? Now, whether Zeus was the sole progenitor of Athena or not, that's how it appeared to all of the Olympians when the goddess exploded out of his forehead. As you might imagine, with his wife Hera being the goddess of marriage and family, she took this as a personal disrespect. So she sat Zeus down, told him how she was feeling, and he vowed to respect her and the relationship from that point forward. Just kidding. Come on, does that sound like either of them? No, what really happened is Hera got revenge by having a baby completely on her own. Except something went wrong during the incubation process. I'm not sure if she was smoking crack during her third trimester or stood too long next to the microwave, but for some reason, her brand new baby boy, who would go on to be called Hephaestus, was born ugly as hell and with deformed legs, so the goddess wanted nothing to do with him and literally threw him off Mount Olympus. Lucky for little Hep, he landed in the ocean and was found by Thetis and Eurynome, two ocean deities, and they raised him by the Oceanus River, where he spent 9 years learning how to work with metals and making everything from jewelry to weapons to eating utensils. One day, Hephaestus sends all the gods these magnificent handcrafted golden thrones, but to get revenge on his mother, he secretly made hers out of adamantium, and when she sat down on it for the first time, magical chains wrapped around her so she couldn't get up. Knowing there could only be one culprit behind this, many Olympians went to Hephaestus on Earth and tried to convince him to let his mother go, but his response would always be, "Who?" The god who finally managed to convince him was Dionysus, the god of wine, and as you might expect, that was only because he got him really drunk. In fact, one of the most famous depictions of Hephaestus shows him being carried to Olympus on the back of a donkey, totally plastered, following Dionysus and a satyr that's playing a flute. In exchange for his help, Hephaestus was allowed to ask Zeus for whatever he wanted, so he requested to be given a permanent residence on Mount Olympus and be the official blacksmith of the gods. He also requested that Aphrodite be made his wife, and they were married immediately. So that is the most common version of Hephaestus' birth and the only one that we've talked about in this series so far, but there's actually another completely different story that some Greeks believed just as much as that one. In this version, Hephaestus is both Zeus and Hera's son, and Hera doesn't just throw him off Mount Olympus for being ugly and crippled. In fact, they have a pretty good relationship in this timeline. But what gets Hephaestus in trouble is when he helps Hera out of the chains that Zeus locked her in as punishment for her sending a storm to wreck Heracles' ship while he was asleep. After Zeus finds out that Hephaestus got involved, he throws him off Mount Olympus. And instead of landing in the ocean, Hephaestus falls for an entire day before crashing into the island of Lemnos, and that is how his legs get crippled. Then he's nursed back to health and taught how to smith by a tribe native to the island. Interestingly, there's no details on how Hephaestus got back to Olympus in this one, but we do know that Zeus let him marry Aphrodite as a way of saying, "my bad," and to get the other gods to stop fighting over her. Honestly, as messed up as it is that Zeus threw him from the heavens, I'd say making Aphrodite his wife definitely makes up for it. It's too bad she would end up cheating on the poor blacksmith with our next subject. Now, when I went back and watched all my old episodes in preparation for this one, I was surprised to see that in the messed up origins of Ares, I completely blew past the story of his birth. I mentioned that his parents were Zeus and Hera, but I didn't share any details regarding his journey from womb to world. I think that's because at the time I couldn't find any myths about his birth, but fortunately I'm better at my job now, and after doing some more digging, I was able to find a single story by the Roman poet Ovid mentioning how Ares came to be. And funnily enough, it's the exact same story as that first Hephaestus variation. The only major difference is that Ovid gave us some insight on how Hera managed to procreate on her own. Apparently, she recruited the help of the Roman goddess of spring named Flora, who gave her a potion that allowed her to create life within her body independently. And honestly, as much as I love the story of Hephaestus' birth and ascension to Olympus, I love it so much that I produced a whole animated episode about it, I do think that this is a more fitting birth for Ares, considering that he and Athena are both gods of war. They're two sides of the same coin, and their origin stories should reflect that. As mentioned prior, she presides over the strategic elements of warfare, while Ares embodies war's most brutal elements: the screams, the bloodshed, the wanton destruction, and unbridled rage. Ares and Athena are not the only brother-sister duo on the pantheon, though. Now, for those who haven't heard the myth before, Artemis and Apollo are the result of Zeus's affair with a female titan named Leto, and giving birth to them almost killed her. Because when Zeus's wife Hera, the goddess of marriage and childbirth, found out about the affair, she wanted to punish everyone involved, even the innocent little babies that were still growing in Leto's womb. So she put a curse on the Titaness that wouldn't allow her to have the babies on the mainland, any island, any place that was under the sun's gaze. And Leto wandered across Greece for 9 days and 9 nights, enduring the pains of labor, searching for a safe place to give birth. At the same time, she was also being pursued by a giant serpent named Python, who was trying to eat her in order to stop the prophecy that her son would one day kill him. According to some versions of the myth, Zeus told his brother Poseidon to use his influence over the ocean to make the island of Delos float unattached to the earth, so it wasn't breaking any of Hera's rules. Then, when her safe haven was ready, he ordered the wind to carry Leto to it. However, in the Homeric hymn to Apollo, Poseidon doesn't make an appearance at all. Instead, Leto gets to Delos herself and makes a deal with the island that Apollo will build his first temple on her if she allows her to give birth there. Delos, who at this point in history wasn't getting much love from mankind due to her rocky, difficult to farm landscapes, accepts the deal, and a few days later, Apollo is born under the shade of an olive tree. An interesting note about Apollo's birth is that almost every goddess was there to help Leto survive it, even his twin sister Artemis, because she was born the day prior and had aged 6 years in less than 24 hours. The only goddesses who weren't in attendance were Hera, of course, and the goddess of childbirth herself, Eileithyia, who Hera had distracted so she wouldn't see Leto in pain and try to help. In order to free Apollo and save Leto, the healing goddess Isis had to literally fly to Olympus, beckon Eileithyia out of Hera's chambers, because there was no way she was going to enter them herself, then take her to Delos, and apparently, as soon as she stepped on the island shore, Apollo was born. He and his sister found the domains that fit them pretty quickly too, especially Artemis.
According to Callimachus's hymn to Artemis, it wasn't long after she could walk and talk that she took it upon herself to sit on Zeus's knee and give him a list of demands. She told him she wanted to be the goddess of the hunt. She wanted a new bow. She wanted her own hunting dogs and a retinue of nymphs and naiads to attend to her at all times. And most importantly, she never wanted to be married. Well, Zeus obviously couldn't say no to his adorable little girl, so he granted every one of her wishes, but it was still up to Artemis to retrieve her gifts. She had to visit Hephaestus and the Cyclopes herself to retrieve her silver bow and golden arrows. She got her 7 hunting dogs from Pan, the god of nature, and even captured 4 golden-horned deer by hand to pull her golden chariot. She would have had 5 deer, but Hera intervened and let one get away, and it would go on to one day be Heracles' 3rd labor to catch it. What's funny about that is that when the day comes, Heracles puts in a ton of effort not to hurt the deer and chases it for an entire year before finally deciding to shoot it. And as soon as he does, Artemis shows up to yell at him. She initially wants to punish him for his sin, but Heracles says he's only acting under the orders of the oracle, so technically it's not his fault, and Artemis sees his point, so she relents and heals the deer of its wounds. Anyway, the rest of Callimachus's hymn covers Artemis practicing shooting with her new bow, recruiting the 80 nymphs that would go on to be her entourage, and ascending to Olympus, where she establishes once and for all that she is the goddess of the hunt.
Similar to his sister, Apollo didn't spend long in his newborn form either. Only a few days passed before he became the long-haired, handsome, beardless youth that he was often depicted as.
The young god would go on to preside over many important aspects of the world and human life. Sunlight, archery, prophecy and oracles, music, song, and poetry, both healing and disease, and lastly, the protection of the young. There's also numerous myths explaining his affiliation with these domains, for example, sunlight. Kind of ironic considering his mom had to give birth in the shade, but when Apollo was born, he was delivered into a ray of sunlight that shone through the branches of the olive tree his mother took shelter under. I should clarify, this doesn't make him the god of the sun. That's Helios, who we'll do a video on in the future. Apollo specifically presides over sunlight. When it comes to archery and prophecy, he took those over almost simultaneously. Not long after he and Artemis's birth, the god of blacksmithing Hephaestus, who knew what it was like to be targeted by his mother Hera, wanted to show them they had a friend on Olympus. As a gesture of goodwill, he gave Artemis a silver bow with golden arrows and Apollo a golden bow with silver arrows. It only took about 4 days of practice for the twins to become masters of their craft, and Apollo knew right away who the first victim of his new skills was going to be: Python, the dragon-headed monstrosity that tried to murder his mother when he was still in her womb. It's said that Apollo went directly to Delphi, where the mighty dragon lurked in the caves of Mount Parnassus, and slayed it with a volley of 100 arrows, earning himself the reputation of being a vanquisher of evil and never missing his target. After Python was dead, Apollo also claimed ownership of the sacred oracle the serpent was guarding, the Oracle of Delphi, and from that point onward, all other oracles would communicate prophecies in Apollo's honor.
Artemis wasn't Apollo's only sibling though. He also had a little brother who he found annoying as shit, and you're about to see why. So if you're like me, your first impression of Hermes came from Disney's Hercules, where he's shown to be a skinny little dude who flutters around, talks like he's at a disco in the 70s, and is so weak that he's actually restrained by 2 of Hades' most incompetent henchmen. Well, I'm here to say that Disney did Hermes dirty, because starting from the day he was born, he proved himself to be one of the strongest and smartest of all the Olympians. Now, it probably won't be a surprise to you that Hermes' father was none other than Zeus, who was apparently just incapable of keeping it in his pants. Hermes' mother was the Pleiad Maia, and Pleiads, for those curious, were a kind of nymph. Now Maia gave birth to Hermes in a cave in Mount Selene, and she was actually pregnant for less than a day before having him, which is only appropriate for a god known for his speed. Then later that same day, after his mom had gone to sleep, Hermes snuck out of his cradle and started exploring the world. Interestingly, the first thing he did after leaving his home was kill a tortoise and make a lyre out of its shell and some sheep guts. Then the little god was hungry, so naturally he chose to steal 50 cattle from his brother Apollo. Apollo. He traveled to Mount Pieria where they were being kept and led them across the sandy beach so no one could track their footprints. But just as a precaution, he made them walk backwards so anyone who saw their prints would think they were headed towards the mountain instead of away from it. There ended up being a witness though, an old man tilling his vineyard, but Hermes told him to forget what he saw that day or he'd do some serious damage to his farm. And as we all learn at one point or another, when a baby who's leading 50 cattle behind him gives you an order, you follow it. So Hermes leads the cattle to the river Alpheus where there was a cow shed. He corralled most of them into the shed, but killed 2 and sacrificed their meat so he could eat it later, because gods aren't allowed to eat mortal food. Then he snuck back into his crib as if nothing had happened, but as we all know, it's basically impossible to do anything when you're that young without your mom finding out about it. Because whether they want to admit it or not, moms are all-knowing and have superpowers. Maya stormed over to Hermes' crib, scolded him for the shenanigans he pulled, and told him Apollo is going to punish you and there is nothing I can do about it. Sure enough, Apollo was able to track down the cattle thief and he was pissed. But of course, when he confronted the newborn saying, "Tell me where you hid my cattle or I'll cast you into the underworld," Hermes played dumb. He said to the sun god, "I don't know if you noticed this, but I'm a baby. Like, a day-old baby. How and why would I ever steal your cows? Also, what even are cows?" Unfortunately for Hermes, Apollo wasn't buying it, so he dragged his little brother to Zeus for help resolving the situation. Once again, Hermes tried playing dumb and swore up and down that he had nothing to do with the cattle theft, but Zeus wasn't buying it either. The king of the gods literally laughed out loud, told Hermes to cut the shit and show Apollo where his cattle were hidden. The newborn did just that, but he could tell Apollo was still really pissed, and he did not want to be on the receiving end of his wrath because as powerful as Hermes was, Apollo was fully grown and far stronger. To appease him, Hermes began to play his lyre, and the marvelous music hit Apollo right in his soul, melting away his anger and filling him with joy. Then, as a friendship offering, Hermes gave Apollo the instrument that made the music he loved so much, and in return, Apollo gave him a whip, making him the keeper of herds. The beautiful thing about that is Apollo would go on to teach his son Orpheus how to play the lyre, and Orpheus would go on to become the most talented musician in all of Greece, but we've talked about that story. Anyway, Hermes swore to never steal from Apollo again, and Apollo swore to be Hermes' best friend and love him more than all of the other gods. Then, to show the significance of his oath, Apollo also gave Hermes the caduceus, the golden staff with 2 snakes wrapped around it that we typically see Hermes portrayed with. After these shenanigans were finally said and done, Zeus saw the potential in Hermes' abilities and thought it wise to make him a close ally. It also never hurts to be friends with someone who can run super fast. So he assigned Hermes with more titles and responsibilities than any other god on the pantheon, including commerce, profit, agreements and contracts, thieves and trickery, travel, roads and borders, hospitality, friendship, sex, sports, athletes, and the fertility of land and cattle, to name just a few. In addition to all of that, he was also the protector of roads and travelers, guided the souls of the dead down to Hades, and directed the dreams sent by Zeus to mortals. But as important as those domains are, I don't know if any of them are as fun as our next subjects. Now, it's a matter of personal preference whether you consider Dionysus an Olympian or not. Some of the ancient Greeks did, and some of them didn't. The one thing that's certain is that whenever I bring up this topic, there has to be at least one comment mentioning that Hestia gave up her throne so Dionysus could sit on the pantheon. And while that might sound like a fitting thing for Hestia to do, there isn't a single ancient source that corroborates this. I'm not sure how the rumor got so popular online, but I can tell you where the idea originated. A book called The Greek Myths, written by Robert Graves in 1955. Graves tried providing his own cohesive narrative of Greek mythology, which is anything but cohesive, and as a result, he took some creative liberties to make it all fit together. He does provide his sources for the claim, Apollodorus' Bibliotheca and Pausanias' Hellados Periegesis, but if you actually read those texts, you'll see that there's no mention of Hestia giving her throne to her nephew. That being said, I do think this interpretation serves as a great example of how myths can evolve as they're passed around, and for all we know, there were some ancient Greeks who believed this. We just don't have a source that proves it. Regardless, I want to talk about Dionysus, because he was brought into this world in the most brutal way possible. Silenus became the foster father of the infant Dionysus after Hera tried to murder him a few too many times. After she convinced the Titans to tear the young god's original form limb from limb, Zeus was able to salvage his son's tiny heart and mixed it into a potion for his lover Semele to drink. But when Hera found out about this, she tricked Semele into demanding to see Zeus's true form, which incinerated her. Zeus then had to search Semele's ashes to find his unborn son barely clinging to life, and this time he had to keep the baby safe from Hera's shenanigans. So he cut open his own thigh and placed the fetus inside. Then when Dionysus was born yet again, Zeus's right-hand man, Hermes, left him in the care of Silenus. Silenus was an elderly satyr who's often credited as the father or grandfather of the entire satyr species, as well as the Nisiad nymphs, who lived with him in a cave on Mount Nysa. Pottery from ancient Greece depicts Silenus as a happy old man with hair everywhere but the top of his head and the usual satyr features, including a pot belly, a snub nose, and the ears and tail of either a goat or a donkey. Also, his wiener is usually hanging out, but whose wasn't in those days? Now, if you know anything about satyrs, then you know they love to party, even more than Andrew WK. And so did Silenus, so he was an interesting choice of guardian for Dionysus. My theory is that Zeus knew Hera didn't pay much attention to Silenus and the satyrs because they were lowly, furry sex perverts, not worth a goddess's time. Regardless, it ended up being a pretty good choice because with the help of the nymphs, Silenus successfully raised him to adulthood, although I think now we know where Dionysus's drinking problem came from. I've always joked that it was the result of his traumatic birth, but combine that with being raised by a constantly intoxicated satyr, poor god never had a chance. So I think the big takeaway here is that if you're planning on doing it with a god, use birth control, or at least think of a safe word to use with your partner so you know they're really who they say they are and not Zeus in disguise. But that'll do it for this episode, mere mortals. Remember to comment your thoughts, sacrifice those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't yet, and I'll see you again next Thursday. Oh, and one more thing, probably the most important thing for you to remember. Jon shot first.